You're not weak because you make mistakes. You're weak because you explain them. And by the time you're done explaining, they've already won. You know exactly what I'm talking about. This isn't the first time it happened. Someone said something, an accusation, a judgment, a sideways comment at the wrong moment. And you felt it, that heat rising in your chest, your heart accelerating, your mind racing to build arguments, find evidence, construct the perfect case to prove they were wrong and you were right. And you spoke, you explained, with details, with context, with evidence, and you still lost. Not the argument, something worse, the respect. You saw it in their eyes. The moment they stopped taking you seriously was the exact moment you started justifying yourself. And the more you talked, the deeper the hole got. Why does this always happen? Why is it that the more you try to be understood, the less you're respected? The answer you've been given your whole life was, be clearer, be more honest, communicate better. You followed the advice. It didn't work, because the problem was never clarity. The problem is that you were taught to play the wrong game. From childhood, you learned that explaining meant surviving, that justifying meant protecting yourself, that logic made sense when you were 5 years old and needed an adult's approval to feel safe. The problem is that you grew up, but that reflex stayed, and now you carry it into meetings, relationships, arguments, social media, treating everyone like judges with power over your reality. And every time you do it, you're not just losing a conversation. You're signaling something that no amount of words can fix. Here's what no one told you. You didn't lose because you communicated poorly. You lost because you accepted, without realizing it, a false premise about what the world rewards. They taught you that being understood is power. That's a lie. Being understood is exposure. Real power is being unreadable, being the only person in the room that no one can fit into a box. While you were trying to be clear, the real game was being played on a layer that no explanation can reach. Machiavelli didn't write for good men. He wrote for real men. Men who understood that the world operates through dynamics that no communication manual will ever teach you. He knew that whoever controls the frame controls reality, and that the frame is never controlled by whoever is defending themselves. 500 years later, modern psychology confirmed it. In every social conflict, whoever asks the questions holds the power. Whoever answers loses status. That's not opinion, that's structure. In this video, you're going to go through 6 phases. The root of the problem, why your nervous system betrays you in every conflict. Silence as an active weapon, not an absence. The 2-frame inversion techniques that turn the attacker into the defendant without them realizing what happened. The art of agreeing without submitting. The distinction that separates someone who admits a mistake from someone who accepts an execution. And finally, the only thing that makes all of this real, integrating your own shadow. But I need to warn you, this is not a list of phrases to memorize. If your voice trembles while using these techniques, they will fail. Because dark psychology is 20% words and 80% internal state. What you're about to learn requires you to kill something. The part of you that needs to be understood. The part that still asks permission to exist. If you're not willing to kill that part, close the video now. If you are, phase 1 starts now. And it's going to show you why your instinct to defend yourself isn't a character flaw. It's a wound that was never treated. Phase 1. The root. Why your body betrays you. Phase 1. The root. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." What you call emotional reactivity is, in reality, programming that was never updated. The average man thinks he defends himself because he has principles, because he values truth, because he doesn't accept injustice. Nice story. The truth is uglier. He defends himself because he has a 5-year-old stored inside him, and that 5-year-old panics every single time an authority figure questions his worth. Think back. When you were a child and an adult accused you of something, what happened in your body? The same thing that happens today. Cortisol spikes. The amygdala hijacks the prefrontal cortex. The rational part of your brain literally goes offline. You enter survival mode. And the only survival strategy you learned back then was explain, justify, prove you're good enough to stay safe. The problem is you grew up. but the programming stayed. Now you're in a work meeting, in an argument with your partner, in an internet comment section, and your nervous system doesn't know the difference. It sees the same threat it saw when you were 5, and it fires the same response. You project the parental figure onto everyone who challenges you, your boss, your partner, the stranger online, and without realizing it, you place them on the throne of judge of your reality. When you understand this, everything changes, because you realize the battle was never with them. It was with an internal ghost that you feed every time you choose to explain yourself. The healing doesn't start with a technique. It starts with the right question. Whose approval am I seeking right now, and why does this person have that power over me? Ask yourself that question the next time you feel the urge to defend yourself. That question alone will interrupt the cycle. If you recognize this mechanism in yourself, comment one word below, root, because recognizing it is the first act of someone who stops being the defendant. Phase 2 comes now, and it's going to give you the most underestimated weapon in the human repertoire. One that costs nothing and destroys more than any argument ever could. Phase 2. The void silence as a weapon. Phase 2. The void. Sun Tzu wrote, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting." Silence is not the absence of a response. It is the most violent response that exists. Most people think silence in conflict means cowardice, not knowing what to say, being lost. So they speak, and they hand over everything. They reveal what hurts, what bothers them, where they're insecure. Every defensive word is a map of your interior distributed for free to whoever is attacking you. Here's what actually happens when you stay silent during an attack. The human brain is biologically incapable of tolerating silence in a conflict. Psychologists call this social vacuum anxiety, the compulsive need to fill empty space with sound, because silence during interpersonal tension signals rupture, threat, unpredictability. When you go quiet, you're not just not responding. You're creating psychological pressure without spending any energy. You're forcing the attacker to sit in the tension they created. And what happens? They speak to fill the void. And when they speak to fill the void, they start renegotiating the accusation itself. You're being completely selfish. Silence. 5 seconds. I mean, not always, but right now you are. You didn't say a word. They retracted on their own. Silence is also a dark mirror. When you don't react, the attacker sees only the reflection of their own aggression. And that is profoundly uncomfortable. They start feeling judged without you having said anything. The power has transferred completely. The application is simple and brutal. The next time someone launches an accusation, count internally to 5 before any response. Not as a polite pause, as a deliberate choice not to give the attacker the jump they're expecting. Eyes locked, face neutral, controlled breathing. You are not the person processing what was said. You are the person who has already decided that their opinion does not define your reality. The difference between someone who practices this and someone who doesn't is visible. A person who doesn't need to respond immediately radiates something that no clever phrase can manufacture. Genuine indifference to external judgment. Pause here for a second. Be honest. When was the last time you stayed completely silent when you were attacked? Not because you didn't know what to say, but because you chose not to lower yourself to respond? If you can't remember a single time, you know exactly what you need to change first. Phase 3 comes now, and it's going to give you the words for when silence isn't enough, and how to use them in a way that turns the attacker into the defendant without them ever seeing it coming. Phase 3. The Aikido agreeing without submitting. Phase 3. The Aikido. Machiavelli wrote, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." But there's a third option he didn't write about because it was reserved for advanced strategists. Being incomprehensible. Being the person who cannot be attacked because they offer no resistance whatsoever. The mistake most people make when silence isn't an option is simple. They push back. Someone attacks, they counterattack. Someone accuses, they deny. It's instinctive, it's natural, and it's exactly what the attacker wants. Because resistance validates the attack. Resistance says, "This accusation has enough weight to move me." The technique phase 3 delivers is called agree and amplify. And it works because it goes against everything your instinct tells you to do. When someone accuses you of something, instead of denying it, you agree and exaggerate until the accusation becomes a caricature. You're using the weight of their strike against them. It's verbal Aikido. They say, "You're completely obsessed with money." The defensive response, "No, I'm not. I just want financial security." Weak, predictable, steps into their frame. The Machiavellian response, "Guilty. I swim in a vault of gold coins every Tuesday like Scrooge McDuck." What happens? The accusation collapses, because you can't attack someone who already owned the position with humor and detachment. The seriousness with which they launched the attack now looks ridiculous compared to the lightness with which you received it. They're left with no ground. But there's a deeper layer here, and this is where most people fail when they try to apply this superficially. Agree and amplify only works from a position of internal security. If you're using it as a defense mechanism, the attacker feels it. The voice wavers slightly, the smile arrives a second late, and the technique becomes disguised desperation. The technique works when you genuinely don't need them to think well of you, and that's not a technique. That's identity construction. A person who knows their generous laughs when called stingy. A person who knows their intelligent laughs when called stupid. If you need to deny it, it's because some part of you believes they might be right. And that's the real work that comes in phase 6. For now, think of 3 situations in your life where you defended yourself when you should have agreed and amplified. You don't need to share them. Just identify them. Feel how much energy you spent trying to convince someone who had no right to judge you. If you identified at least one, comment Aikido, because that means you're starting to see the game for what it is. Phase 4 comes now, and in it you're going to learn something even more surgical. How to turn any attack into an interrogation of the attacker without them ever realizing the defendant's role changed hands. Phase 4. The judge. Whoever asks the questions holds the power. Phase 4. The judge. Nietzsche wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But in the field of social dynamics, there's an even more brutal principle. Whoever defines the why of the conversation controls the entire conversation. Every conflict has an invisible structure. There's a judge and there's a defendant. The judge asks questions. The defendant answers. And you were trained by school, by family, by society to be the defendant. To answer, to justify, to prove. The mistake most people make is accepting that role without question. Someone asks, "Why did you do that?" And you answer, "Why were you late?" And you explain, "Who do you think you are?" And you retreat. Every answer is a concession of status. Every explanation confirms that they have the authority to demand one. The dark truth is this: you were never required to answer. You were only conditioned to believe you were. Frame inversion works like this. You receive a question loaded with implicit judgment, and instead of responding to the content, you examine the behavior of whoever is asking. "Why are you always so late?" Defensive response, "There was traffic. My alarm didn't go off." You lost. Inversion response, "Why does my arrival time affect your emotional state so deeply?" Now we're not talking about the clock anymore. We're talking about their emotional stability. You're being ridiculous. Inversion, "What makes you feel the need to use labels like that to get your point across?" You just psychoanalyzed the attacker in real time. They came to knock you down, and now they're being observed like a specimen in a jar. Some phrases that function as frame shields. It's interesting that you perceive it that way. You seem very invested in this. What are you trying to accomplish with that question? These phrases deny nothing, confirm nothing. They simply redirect the spotlight. And the spotlight is everything. The practical application. In the next conflict situation, before responding to any question, pause and ask yourself internally, does this question presuppose that I owe this person an answer? If the answer is no, you don't respond to the content. You examine the frame. I'm going to be direct with you now. If you've made it this far and you're still thinking, but what if the person actually has a valid point? You didn't understand anything. This is not about ignoring legitimate criticism. It's about stopping treating every attack as if it were a court of justice where you're the defendant and they're the judge. You can consider a criticism internally, in private, calmly, without performing public defense for someone who doesn't deserve access to your internal process. If you understood the difference, you're ready for Phase 5. And Phase 5 is going to show you something that looks like weakness but is the most sophisticated move in this entire framework. Phase 5. The Abyss. Agreeing as an act of power. Phase 5. The Abyss. There are 6 phases in this video. You've been through 4. This is the one most people will resist the most, because it looks like capitulation. Because it goes against everything your pride-built identity will want to accept. Viktor Frankl survived concentration camps and wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. Agreeing is not surrendering. It's choosing where your battle actually happens." The mistake most people make when under intense attack, when someone is listing your flaws, shouting, pressuring, trying to force a reaction, is to resist, push back, defend the fortress. And that's exactly the fuel the fire needs. Resistance validates anger. When you resist, you confirm that the attack landed where it was intended. You're saying, "This has power over me." The attacker feels that and intensifies. The Abyss technique works like this. You look the attacker in the eyes and say, with complete calm, "You're right," and you stop. This is not submission. It's fogging. You are the fog bank. The rock they threw passed through you and disappeared without a sound. They pushed a door expecting it to be locked. The door opened. They fell. But here's the distinction that makes this power instead of defeat. You agree with the fact without accepting the identity they're trying to impose on you. You made errors in this report. Power response: there are errors, yes. I'll fix them. What was left out? The word incompetent. You admitted the mistake, which is real, and ignored the character sentence, which is manipulation. Only a person who is genuinely secure in their competence can admit a mistake that easily. Insecure people fight to the death to admit nothing, because deep down they fear that the admission confirms the worst about them. This is the distinction between admitting a behavior and accepting an identity execution. You made a mistake, yes. You're a failure, that part you leave in the air without response, without energy. It wilts on its own. Now a question I want you to answer honestly to yourself, not in the comments. What is the accusation that hurts you most when someone throws it in your face? Not the most unfair one, the one that hurts the deepest, because that pain is the map. It points exactly to where Phase 6 is going to operate. And Phase 6 is where everything converges. It's the foundation without which Phases 2, 3, 4, and 5 are nothing but more sophisticated performance. It's where you'll discover why some people are literally impossible to attack. And it's not because they learned the right techniques. If you've made it this far, you're already not the same person who pressed play. Comment Abyss. Not for me. To register that you crossed the hardest half. Phase 6. The shadow. The only real foundation. Phase 6. The hardest. The most important. Because everything you learned before, the silence, the aikido, the frame inversion, the agreement as power, are tools. And tools in the hands of a person who is still afraid of themselves are just more sophisticated disguises. Carl Jung spent decades mapping what he called the shadow. The part of you that was rejected, hidden, shamed since childhood. The anger that was wrong. The ambition that was arrogant. The selfishness that was ugly. The cruelty you're capable of but never admit. You didn't eliminate those parts. You pushed them into the basement. And they stayed there in the dark, growing. And here is the mechanism that destroys everything. When someone attacks you using exactly one of those aspects you've hidden, when they call selfish someone who was taught that selfishness is a sin, when they call cruel someone who never accepted their own capacity for cruelty, the attack doesn't activate your reasoning. It activates your basement. And from the basement comes the reaction you cannot control. You're not defending yourself against the accusation. You're defending yourself against the shadow inside you that the accusation woke up. This is the only reason the techniques fail. Not lack of practice. It's that the wound the attacker touches already existed before they arrived. Shadow integration is not a motivational exercise. It is the most uncomfortable and most necessary process there is, looking at the parts you reject in yourself, naming them and accepting that you are capable of them. Not to act from them without consciousness, but so they lose the power to control you when someone uses them as a weapon. When you know you're capable of selfishness and accept that, the accusation of selfishness has nowhere to anchor. When you accept your own capacity for cruelty, for failure, for weakness, for grandiosity, for envy, you remove the trigger from the hands of anyone who tries to fire you. You cannot be shamed by what you have already named. You cannot be exposed by what you have already illuminated. Think of the most untouchable person you know. Not the most aggressive, not the coldest, the most solid, the one who receives criticism without trembling, praise without inflating, attacks without reacting. You probably interpreted that as an absence of emotion. It isn't. It's the complete presence of self-knowledge. That person already went down to the basement, already found the monsters, already sat with them until the fear stopped. This isn't learned in a weekend, can't be bought in a course, can't be faked with the right phrases. But it begins with a question you're going to ask yourself today, in silence, without an audience. What accusation, if someone threw it in my face right now, would make me lose control? And what does that accusation say about what I haven't yet accepted in myself? That question is the entrance to the basement. And what you find there won't destroy you. It will make you impossible to destroy. So, what happens when you actually apply all of this? Quick recap. You understood the root, the childhood conditioning that turns every attack into a request for approval. You learned the void silence as psychological pressure that makes the attacker retract on their own. You mastered the Aikido, agreeing and amplifying until the accusation becomes a caricature. You took the role of judge, using questions to redirect the spotlight back onto the attacker. You learned to agree with the fact without accepting the identity execution. And you went down to the shadow, the only place where real invulnerability exists. 6 phases. 1 direction. From defendant to sovereign. But what does that mean in practice, in daily life, in the life you're going to live from this moment forward? Epic closing. The world is getting louder, more reactive, more exposed. More and more people spend their entire lives in defense mode, justifying themselves to bosses, partners, strangers on the internet, to their own reflection. The culture of noise rewards whoever screams the loudest, not whoever understands the deepest. That's not a problem. That's your competitive advantage. If you made it this far, you're not the majority. Most people close a video at the first discomfort. You stayed because some part of you recognized that what was being said was true. A truth that hurts more than a comfortable lie. That's not common. And it's not small. Now you have a choice. You can close this video, feel like it was interesting, and go back to being exactly who you were before you press play. Many will do that. Or you can decide that the person who started this video and the person finishing it are no longer the same. That something changed, not because it was easy, but because you chose not to look away. You can't sit on the fence. Defendant or sovereign. There is no middle ground. The need to be understood is the most invisible and most heavy chain that exists. And you just spent the last several minutes learning how to cut it. Not to become cold, to become free. There is an enormous difference between the person who doesn't explain themselves because they're afraid of being exposed, and the person who doesn't explain themselves because they don't need permission to exist. Be the second. If something in this video cut deep, a concept, a phrase, a phase, comment below which one it was. Not for engagement, because naming what affected you is the first step of the real work. If you're going to take this beyond this video, leave a like. Not for the algorithm, as a personal record that you heard something you can't unhear. And if you want to continue this descent, power, manipulation, human nature, the laws nobody writes but everyone obeys. Subscribe. The next video is going to show you why the most dangerous people you've ever met never needed to intimidate anyone. And exactly how they did it.